In the glittering world of wealth and prestige, not every jewel that sparkles is flawless. Behind the velvet curtains of high society galas and lavish mansions, real intentions twist quietly in the dark. When billionaire Ethan Montgomery, a captivating tech tycoon, betrayed his stunning pregnant wife Charlotte with none other than her lifelong best friend, no one imagined what she would do next. People expected heartbreak and tears. But Charlotte was not just any woman. Instead of letting her pain shatter her, she crafted a careful plan, driven by justice and revenge. Neither Ethan nor that so-called friend had the slightest idea that Charlotte's quiet strength could match any storm, and her revenge would strip them of everything from the outside in. To everyone else, Ethan Montgomery and Charlotte Harris were the picture of a perfect fairy tale. Ethan, heir to the prestigious Montgomery estate nestled in Napa Valley, had multiplied his family's fortune through bold tech investments in Silicon Valley, building sleek skyscrapers that carried his name. Charlotte was the beloved daughter of acclaimed fashion designer Helen Harris, whose gowns once turned heads on runways in Paris and Milan. Their wedding, orchestrated by the sought-after planner Olivia Grant, famous for hosting events for Beyoncé, had been the event of the year. Charlotte's beauty was the talk of their circle. Long caramel hair falling gracefully over her shoulders, eyes the color of deep sapphires, and a figure that made strangers stop and stare. But more than anything, it was her kindness that everyone adored. She had a genuine warmth and an open smile that made people feel instantly welcome. Yet under that warmth lay a quiet truth Charlotte never confessed to anyone. Sometimes, late at night, she wondered if she was truly enough for a man like Ethan. She had always felt a step behind his world of generational power and ruthless ambition. She, the daughter of an artist, trying to belong among tech titans and old money. To keep that place, she made herself perfect, gracious, supportive, trusting to a fault. Those closest to her believed she was pure-hearted to a fault, someone who would never suspect betrayal from those she loved most. At 35, Ethan had an undeniable presence that filled any room. Tall, broad-shouldered, and carrying himself with a calm authority, he moved like modern royalty. His steady, commanding voice alone could sway investors and attract global partners without effort. He claimed to love Charlotte, or so it seemed, but he also craved the thrill of new conquests, whether behind office doors or beyond. That evening, as Charlotte stood in front of her vanity preparing for a charity gala at a luxurious downtown hotel, she gently laid her hand on her slightly rounded belly. 3 months pregnant, the change was small but deeply felt. This baby, their first, was everything she had dreamed of since the day they said, "I do." The changes were still subtle, but she felt them deeply. This child, their first, was the dream she had carried in her heart since the day she married Ethan. On her vanity table sat her sapphire stud earrings, the gift Ethan had given her the night they found out about the baby. The promise of a brand new chapter glowed in their sparkle. Earlier that day, Ethan had been tied up in a high-stakes meeting to finalize a major software acquisition. He was running behind schedule, and when Charlotte tried calling him, each attempt went straight to voicemail. In the past, she might have panicked, maybe even felt a stab of jealousy. But after years standing faithfully beside her billionaire husband, she trusted he would always come through for her. Still, as she set her phone down, a quiet voice deep inside whispered old insecurities she hated to admit. What if you're not enough to hold his focus anymore? What if the world he lives in always tempts him with something shinier, younger, more thrilling? She pressed a hand to her belly and forced herself to breathe, reminding herself she was being silly. Ethan adored her. He always had. She had no clue that behind closed doors something much darker was unraveling. Smiling to herself, Charlotte wondered if her childhood best friend, Madison Price, would show up at the gala tonight. Madison had been her rock since middle school, the one person Charlotte believed would never break her trust. Little did she know that the people she trusted most were about to rip her world apart in the cruelest way. The charity gala was breathtaking. Soft music drifted through the grand ballroom, mingling with the quiet chatter of Silicon Valley's elite. Crystal chandeliers floated above round tables, covered in pristine white linens. Society photographers moved discreetly through the crowd, snapping candid shots of the most influential names in tech and finance. Between the clinking of champagne glasses and the low hum of polite laughter, Charlotte found herself scanning the room for Ethan. He still hadn't arrived, despite his promise. In Charlotte's circle, punctuality at charity events wasn't just polite, it was expected. A missing spouse made people whisper. And more pressing? Where was Madison Price? She hadn't answered any of Charlotte's texts all afternoon. Charlotte sank into her assigned seat, her stomach tight with a knot of worry. She took slow sips of water to steady her nerves, resting her hand on her belly to soothe the tiny life growing inside her. Ethan will be here, she whispered under her breath. He always is. But as minutes turned into hours, there was still no sign of Ethan or Madison. Restless, Charlotte thanked her gracious host, excused herself quietly, and slipped outside for a breath of fresh air. The doorman recognized her instantly and signaled for the valet. But Ethan's private driver was nowhere in sight. Casting one last glance at the Grand Hotel entrance, Charlotte made up her mind to go home alone. She could have asked any of her well-connected friends for a ride, but a strange, aching need for solitude pulled her toward the quiet of home. She craved the quiet of her own home, far from the glitter and gossip, so she could collect her thoughts. That was when her phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number lit up the screen. "Ethan is cheating on you. Ask Madison." Her heart slammed against her ribs. She read the message over and over, her mind spinning. This had to be a cruel prank or some random spam. But who would go that far? A storm of anxiety, disbelief, and raw hurt coiled inside her. She tried calling Madison first. No answer. She dialed Ethan next, straight to voicemail. By the time Charlotte climbed into a cab, she was shaking. Could it be true? Could the man she adored, the father of her unborn child, really betray her like this? Deep down, a quiet voice whispered that the text might be a sign, a warning she couldn't brush aside. By the time she reached the Grand Montgomery penthouse, the panic had hardened into a dull, relentless ache. Her designer heels echoed through the silent hallway as she stepped into the massive living room. Darkness wrapped the space, broken only by the city skyline glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Alone in the shadowy calm, Charlotte sank onto a plush sofa, phone tight in her hand. She called Madison again. Nothing. She called Ethan. Still nothing. The text glared back at her like an accusation. With trembling fingers, she stroked her belly and whispered, "I hope this isn't real." She longed for an explanation, something, anything to tell her that her life wasn't crumbling beneath her feet. But deep down she could feel it. The first cracks in her perfect world. Morning brought a cruel kind of clarity. Charlotte woke to soft sunlight spilling through the penthouse windows, her eyes heavy from a night of restless sleep. She reached for her phone. Still no messages from Ethan or Madison. Fear and anger churned low in her stomach. Normally, Ethan would be at the sleek marble breakfast bar, scrolling through emails with a mug of strong black coffee. Predictable, dependable. But as she drifted through the quiet apartment, there was no sign of him. She thought about calling his office, but paused. What would I even say? "Hi, have you seen my husband who might be cheating on me?" The idea felt absurd and humiliating. Determined not to drown in panic, Charlotte splashed cold water on her face, changed into a simple blouse and jeans, and decided to pay Madison an unannounced visit. The doorman outside Madison's high-rise condo in Palo Alto recognized Charlotte instantly and let her up without hesitation. When she reached Madison's floor, she noticed the apartment door was slightly ajar, something that struck Charlotte as oddly out of place. She pushed it open gently, her voice low and careful. "Madison, are you here? Are you here?" The living room was a mess, pillows scattered, a glass tipped over on the coffee table, shoes tossed carelessly by the couch. Heart pounding, Charlotte stepped further inside, drawn toward the faint sound of hushed voices coming from the bedroom. Before she could fully gather her thoughts, Madison appeared in the hallway, wrapped in a silky robe, hair tousled and cheeks flushed with unmistakable guilt. The moment Madison saw Charlotte standing there, she froze. Charlotte, what are you doing here?" she stammered, her eyes darting toward the bedroom door. Charlotte's mouth felt dry as sand. She forced herself to hold steady, though her mind buzzed with 1,000 questions. "I was worried. You didn't show up last night, and then I got a strange text. Is Ethan here?" Charlotte's words trembled only slightly. Madison's eyes widened in panic. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but before she could, Ethan himself stepped out from the bedroom behind her. His shirt hung open, his hair a mess. The second he saw Charlotte, he stopped cold. For one suspended heartbeat, Charlotte could hear nothing but the thunder of her pulse. She felt her legs weaken as a brutal truth slammed into her chest, louder than any words could ever confess. In that single glance, every promise, every vow, every whispered "I love you" turned to dust inside her ribcage. A raw ache pulsed behind her eyes, begging to spill out, but she forced it down with a gasp that sounded more like a broken sob caught in her throat. It hit Charlotte like a slow-motion blow to the chest. The room seemed to tilt around her. She clutched the back of a nearby chair to steady herself, a sharp, freezing shock pricking her skin. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was betrayal in its rawest, ugliest form. The best friend she had trusted with every secret, and the husband she loved beyond reason, stood side by side, their guilt painted clearly across their faces. For a moment, no one moved. Silence pressed down heavier than any words could. Then, without a word, Charlotte spun on her heel, her breathing jagged. She ignored their desperate calls of her name as she stormed toward the door. Each step felt like wading through quicksand, but she forced herself forward. She didn't cry, not yet. Only a blazing, poisonous rage pulsed through her veins. Flashes of her and Madison giggling at sleepovers as teenagers flickered in her mind, overlapped with the memory of Ethan slipping a wedding band onto her finger with the promise of forever. How had it come to this? She stepped into the elevator, hot tears threatening to spill, but she refused to let them win. In that moment, something inside her hardened, a cold, unwavering resolve. She was done being the naive one. If Ethan and Madison thought they could do this to her while she carried his child, they had made a devastating mistake. Charlotte left Madison's building in a daze, flagging down the first cab she spotted. Settling into the back seat, the numbness of shock started to slip away, replaced by a hurricane of thoughts. How long has this been happening? How could they betray me like this? And what about our baby? She typed out a quick text to her mother, Helen Harris. "We need to talk. Urgent." Within moments, her phone rang. Helen's concerned voice, still carrying the gentle lilt she used when discussing haute couture fabrics, instantly calmed Charlotte's frayed nerves. Without missing a beat, Helen told her to come over right away. Helen Harris's townhouse in Los Altos Hills was a peaceful sanctuary, filled with elegant art, cozy furniture, and a quiet backyard garden Charlotte had adored since childhood. The second she walked through the door, her mother pulled her into a firm embrace, asking nothing until she guided Charlotte to the sofa. At last, the tears broke free. Between ragged sobs, Charlotte poured out everything she had uncovered that morning. Helen listened in stunned silence, her face etched with sorrow. "Oh, my sweet girl, I'm so sorry," she murmured, rubbing Charlotte's back soothingly. "I never trusted Madison. Something about her always felt off to me, but I never imagined Ethan would do this." Helen brought her a steaming cup of chamomile tea, urging her to rest, but rest was the last thing on Charlotte's mind. She wiped her tears on her sleeve, anger clashing with a sharp sting of guilt. How could I have been so blind, she thought bitterly. I let her so close. I trusted too easily, like a fool. For a fleeting moment, she hated herself for handing Madison the knife that carved up her marriage. She needed to piece together the betrayal, both the heartbreak and the money. Her inheritance from her father's side was considerable, but it was nothing compared to the sprawling Montgomery fortune. Ethan's assets were tangled in a maze of shell corporations and trust funds. And then there was the baby. What would this mean for her child's future? All day, as Helen did her best to comfort her, Charlotte's phone buzzed non-stop with calls and texts from Ethan. She ignored everyone. Voicemails stacked up, apologies, excuses, desperate pleas for forgiveness. She deleted them all without listening. Madison tried too, sending frantic texts begging to explain. Charlotte blocked her number without a second thought. By late afternoon, Helen gently suggested they reach out to one of her oldest friends, Richard Langford, a high-powered attorney with a reputation for protecting the city's most powerful families with quiet ferocity. He'll know exactly how to protect you and the baby. "Charlotte," Helen said firmly, If Ethan thinks he can walk all over you, he's about to learn he's wrong. That evening, Helen and Charlotte made their way to Richard Langford's law office in downtown Palo Alto. Richard, a composed man in his 50s with neatly trimmed salt and pepper hair and keen, perceptive eyes, welcomed them and listened carefully as Charlotte laid out every detail. "There's no need to rush a divorce just yet," he advised once she finished. "But Charlotte, you must protect your interests as the mother of Ethan's child. You have leverage. If his actions threaten your security or the baby's future, you have every right to take decisive action." Charlotte left Richard's office that night with a folder of paperwork and the seed of a plan taking shape in her mind. She didn't know exactly how this would end, but she knew one thing for sure. She wouldn't stay silent. She wouldn't let Ethan and Madison walk away without consequences. Yet as she sat in the back of the car on the way home, paperwork clutched tight against her chest, a whisper of fear slid through her confidence. What if I fail? What if this fight breaks me instead of them? She drew in a shaky breath, brushing her fingers over her belly. No, she told herself fiercely. This is for my child. I won't back down. She was a Harris after all, and soon she would be a mother. Her baby deserved a legacy stronger than betrayal. Ethan had never been one to shy away from confrontation in business. He faced deals head-on, even ruthlessly. But when it came to his personal life, he was floundering. Charlotte's icy silence over the past 2 days rattled him more than any screaming match ever could. He had tried to see her at the penthouse, only to discover the locks changed and a private security team that refused him entry. He called Helen Harris, only to be curtly turned away. Even his personal assistant picked up on the tension, as rumors whispered through Montgomery Technology's sleek headquarters. No one could remember the last time the unshakable Ethan Montgomery paced his office, tie loosened, eyes clouded with regret. On the 3rd day, he showed up at the penthouse again, this time finding Charlotte waiting in the living room. She stood by the grand piano, her posture unflinching, her face calm and composed. He couldn't help but notice the gentle curve of her belly, a painfully visible reminder of the life they had created together. He swallowed hard, nerves tightening his chest as he stepped closer. "Charlotte," he began, his voice cracking with desperation. "I'm sorry. I never meant." She lifted a hand, cutting him off coldly. "I don't want your apologies, Ethan." Her tone was controlled, but beneath it he could feel the fire burning. "I want to know why." He ran a trembling hand through his hair, searching for words he knew would never be enough. "It just happened. There's no excuse. I never meant to hurt you. I was lonely. You were so focused on the pregnancy and Madison was. Don't you dare blame this on me, or this baby." Charlotte snapped, her eyes blazing. "You lied to me. You lied to everyone." Ethan lowered his gaze to the floor, shame tightening around his throat like a noose. Shame washed over him. "I know. I'm not trying to make excuses." They stood in heavy silence, the tension thicker than the luxurious curtains draped around them. At last, Charlotte's voice cut through the quiet, her stare unflinching. "I have no intention of letting you off easily. You and Madison betrayed me. You broke our vows. I don't trust you anymore. But for the sake of our baby, I suggest we keep this civil, at least in public." Ethan nodded slowly, a flicker of relief and worry mingling in his eyes. "So, what does that mean? You want a divorce?" Charlotte exhaled, her expression steel solid. "Not yet. I haven't decided, but don't think for a second I'll just accept this. If you expect me to crawl away quietly, think again. I'm a Harris. I know exactly what I'm worth." A hint of panic flickered behind Ethan's calm mask. He knew too well the Harris family was no less powerful than the Montgomery name. In that hushed, tastefully decorated room, he realized Charlotte was no longer the trusting woman he thought he could control. She was becoming someone stronger, someone he might never outmaneuver again. Before he could say another word, she turned sharply toward the door. "Don't contact me unless it's about the baby or something official. I'll decide where this goes next. And don't think Madison is getting away with this. Neither of you has a clue what you've started." With that, she left him standing there. Ethan dropped into a chair, his pulse hammering. He knew better than anyone, an angry Charlotte Harris was a storm no one could contain, and he had just set it loose. True to her word, Charlotte kept her composure in public. She attended charity galas and networking events alone, radiating elegance and calm. When journalists inquired about Ethan, she merely smiled and blamed his absence on urgent business abroad. The rumor mill spun wildly, but no one could confirm the whispers of trouble behind closed doors. Behind the scenes, however, Charlotte was a whirlwind. She had retained Richard Langford to investigate every detail of Ethan's business interests. It didn't take long for Richard to find something damning. Although the Montgomery empire looked rock solid, a significant portion of Ethan's recent ventures were funded by high-risk private loans. Turns out, Ethan had over-leveraged himself to accelerate his latest expansions, taking reckless bets that could topple the whole house of cards if anything went wrong. It was a weak spot Charlotte planned to use to her advantage. If those projects stumbled or lenders lost faith, Ethan could lose everything overnight. And with so much of the Montgomery legacy tied to these ventures, the family's reputation could shatter with him. As for Madison, Charlotte was crafting something far more personal. Quietly digging through old contacts and discreet sources, she discovered her former best friend wasn't nearly as secure as she pretended. Despite her showy lifestyle, Madison's parents had once been well off, but a string of disastrous investments had drained the family's wealth, leaving Madison scrambling to keep up the illusion. So when Ethan came along, flush with money and drawn to reckless thrills, Madison hadn't been able to resist. One evening, Charlotte invited her most trusted inner circle to her mother's house in Los Altos Hills. Among them were old friends like Grace and Fiona, who had known Charlotte and Madison since high school. Over cups of fresh coffee and murmured encouragement, Charlotte laid bare the truth about Ethan and Madison's affair. Gasps and exclamations of disbelief filled the room. Many had long suspected something was off, but hearing it confirmed left them furious on Charlotte's behalf. That night, an unspoken alliance formed. Grace, a savvy PR consultant, knew exactly how to spin a story or leak a rumor that could sway public perception. Fiona, an experienced event planner, had her finger on the pulse of every high-profile gathering from San Francisco to Silicon Valley. Together, they could pull invisible strings to quietly shred Madison's spotless reputation and plant seeds of doubt about Ethan's business empire. But later that night, after everyone had left and the house had gone still, Charlotte sat alone by the garden window, staring into the dark. For a flicker of a moment, she questioned herself. What if this backfires? What if I look vindictive instead of strong? She pressed a palm to her belly, grounding herself in the heartbeat she carried. No, this is for him. For us. And just like that, the hesitation burned away, replaced by resolve sharper than ever. It started subtly, whispers that Ethan's new smart city development was behind schedule. Hints dropped to the right ears that Montgomery Innovations was overextended on risky loans. Anonymous tips sent to gossip sites, linking Madison to shady backdoor deals and unpaid debts. These small, scattered stories began to snowball, setting tongues wagging among the tech elite and venture capital circles. Meanwhile, Charlotte stayed perfectly composed whenever she and Ethan had to appear together in public. Her gracious smile never faltered, but her eyes never met his. He tried to woo her back, showering her with extravagant gifts and bouquets of white roses. She refused them all. Friends and socialites noticed the subtle strain, but were too polite or too intimidated to ask questions outright. Just when Ethan thought the worst had passed, Charlotte's quiet strategy began to unravel everything he had so carefully built. He didn't see it coming, but the seeds of her revenge were sprouting fast, and they would bear fruit far more bitter than anything he could imagine. He felt the pressure closing in. Investors who once fought to throw money at him suddenly hesitated. Bankers who used to grant him generous extensions started demanding clearer terms. Even his father, Lawrence Montgomery, requested an urgent sit-down to address the rumors swirling through boardrooms and gala dinners alike. The day Lawrence summoned him to the Montgomery Tower boardroom, Ethan braced himself for a reckoning. His father was formidable, a seasoned businessman in his late 60s who valued the Montgomery name above all else. In Lawrence's office, oak paneling and stately antique furniture cast an air of authority over every word spoken. "What's this nonsense I'm hearing about your smart city project falling behind schedule?" Lawrence barked, his voice sharp. And this talk about you dabbling in shady private loans? Ethan fought to keep his face calm. It's just gossip, Dad. I've got everything under control. Lawrence's cold stare didn't soften. Listen to me, son. I've always admired your ambition, but lately you've crossed the line. You've taken too many reckless risks. Get these rumors under control before they stain our name. Ethan forced a nod, promising he would fix it quickly. But as soon as he stepped out of Montgomery Tower, dread curled in his gut. He had no idea how to stop it. The rumors Charlotte and her allies had seeded were hitting him from every side. For every whisper he tried to quash, another one popped up. He paused at the foot of the marble steps outside the main entrance, the cold breeze slapping his face like a wake-up call he didn't want. His pulse thudded painfully in his ears as he gripped the railing, fighting the tight knot of panic closing in around his throat. He had always prided himself on being untouchable, a master at control in any crisis, but now every move seemed to make it worse. A flicker of raw fear crawled under his skin. What if Charlotte had already won, and he was just too stubborn to admit it? Even his CFO, Linda Morales, caught the tremors shaking their reputation. Ethan, we need a damage control plan, she urged in a low voice after a tense meeting. Our brand can't survive these hits forever. While Ethan battled crises at work, his personal life disintegrated. Madison, now iced out by polite society and ignored by Ethan in public, spiraled into panic. She peppered him with endless calls and angry messages, demanding he leave Charlotte and make their affair official once and for all. But Ethan knew too well. Divorcing Charlotte abruptly, especially with her family's influence, would be a public relations disaster and a legal minefield. If I push for a divorce now, he thought grimly, I could lose half of everything I've built. Maybe more if she proves adultery. To make matters worse, Madison started dropping veiled threats that she'd expose everything if he didn't give in to her demands. After one vicious shouting match in her condo, Ethan stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Only then did it dawn on him that he'd trapped himself with a desperate woman who had nothing left to lose. Meanwhile, from the quiet comfort of her mother's house, Charlotte watched him unravel, carefully tugging at every thread through her loyal network. She fed the right people the right whispers, never too obvious, never traced back to her directly. Charlotte quietly began meeting with real estate brokers and top-tier attorneys, exploring every legal avenue to isolate Ethan financially. For every small step Ethan took to regain control, Charlotte ensured a subtle push knocked him 2 steps back. Yet revenge didn't consume her entirely. She never missed a single prenatal checkup, devoting herself to her baby's health above all else. She practiced meditation, worked with a trainer who specialized in prenatal fitness, and consulted nutritionists to give her child the strongest start possible. In a strange way, the chaos in her marriage only sharpened her resolve to build a better life for her baby, one untouched by lies. Meanwhile, the strain between Ethan, Madison, and the mounting financial pressure were colliding fast, about to split their perfect facade wide open, and Charlotte was ready to watch it happen. Amid the brewing chaos, one date loomed large on the city's social calendar: the annual Montgomery Foundation Gala. It was always an extravagant night of glamour, where Silicon Valley's wealthiest gathered to flaunt their generosity. This year, though, it felt more like a live grenade waiting to detonate. Ethan had no choice but to attend. His presence was vital to calm jittery investors and donors. Technically, Charlotte was still the evening's hostess, but she made it clear she wouldn't be arriving on his arm. Instead, she agreed to appear separately, for decorum only. When the big night arrived, the grand ballroom at the Fairmont Hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers and towering floral displays. Hundreds of guests glided through the room in couture gowns and tailored tuxedos, sipping champagne and trading hushed gossip about the Montgomerys' rumored scandal. At the center stood Ethan, polished in a midnight blue tux, wearing a strained but practiced smile. Then Charlotte entered, regal in a floor-length emerald gown that beautifully embraced her growing baby bump. Heads turned instantly. She greeted everyone with warmth, her posture radiating quiet power. Ethan couldn't stop the sting of admiration that cut through his guilt. Charlotte's poise made him painfully aware of how deeply he had failed her. To many guests' shock, Madison made her own dramatic entrance, brazen in a fiery red dress that clung to every curve. She didn't bother keeping her distance from Ethan, hovering nearby whenever she could. The tension between the three of them clung to the air like static, and the ballroom buzzed as camera flashes captured the wordless war playing out under crystal chandeliers. Midway through the evening, Charlotte stepped onto the stage beside the foundation's board members to deliver a short speech. She spoke sincerely about the charity's mission, funding scholarships for underserved youth, and closed with a pointed message about trust and integrity. Her final line, offered to the sea of glittering donors, dripped with hidden meaning. It's in our darkest moments that true loyalty reveals itself. May we all cherish and honor that bond. Moments later, Madison cornered Ethan near the lavish seafood bar, her voice low and venomous. "What am I doing here alone?" she snapped, her eyes blazing with frustration. "You promised you'd stand by me, and now you're here playing the devoted husband while everyone whispers about us." Madison hissed, her voice just loud enough to draw startled glances from nearby guests. Ethan tried to keep his expression calm. "Madison, not here. Now isn't the time. We'll talk later, okay?" But Madison wouldn't be brushed aside. She pushed closer, her frustration boiling over in front of a circle of horrified socialites. Her voice rose, reckless and sharp. "Don't you dare treat me like your dirty secret, Ethan. You're the one who came after me. You think you can just toss me aside when you're done?" Ethan's face drained of color as heads turned, stunned donors, business partners, and a few lurking photographers snapping the heated exchange. This public humiliation was his worst nightmare come true. Across the glittering ballroom, Charlotte watched the chaos unfold with a quiet, vicious satisfaction. The carefully laid trap was working better than she could have hoped. Panicking, Ethan grabbed Madison's arm, trying to guide her away from the curious crowd, but it was far too late. The damage was done. Everyone had seen enough to know the affair rumors weren't idle gossip. They were painfully real. As tension spiked, the Montgomery Foundation gala twisted from an elegant fundraiser into a full-blown scandal, centered on three people: the powerful husband, his dignified, pregnant wife, and the best friend who had just shattered what was left of their respectable facade. In the days that followed, tabloids had a field day. Pictures of Madison's outburst and Ethan's mortified reaction were splashed across every gossip site and social feed, paired with lurid headlines predicting the implosion of the Montgomery marriage. Some outlets even hinted at Ethan's mounting business troubles and Madison's quiet money problems. Ethan's phone rang non-stop, journalists clamoring for statements, worried investors demanding explanations, and family members seething with embarrassment. His father, Lawrence Montgomery, was livid when he finally got him on the line. "How could you let this circus happen?" Lawrence roared. "You've dragged our name through the mud after decades of building it up. Fix this, Ethan, or I swear I will." Behind the scenes, Charlotte calmly poured more fuel on the blaze. Grace, her trusted PR strategist, arranged an exclusive leak to a prominent society columnist, exposing that Charlotte hadn't received the emotional or financial support any expectant mother should have. The piece laid out Ethan's reckless spending and lavish affairs, hinting at neglected charitable pledges and shady money management. Public opinion quickly shifted in Charlotte's favor. Online forums buzzed with sympathy for the wronged wife, now carrying Ethan's heir. Women's advocacy groups quietly highlighted her story, how she faced betrayal, a complicated pregnancy, and relentless public scrutiny with grace and quiet strength. Charlotte never gave an official statement. Her silence only made the narrative more compelling. Meanwhile, the financial fallout grew worse by the day. Banks began reviewing their loans to Montgomery Innovations, raising red flags on outstanding debts. Smaller investors threatened to pull out altogether. Linda Morales, the CFO, worked around the clock to salvage fragile deals, but each morning brought a fresh scandal splashed across the headlines. The once rock-solid empire teetered closer to collapse. Backed into a corner, Ethan scrambled to regain control. He called for a press conference to calm shareholders and reassure the board. But the morning of the event, an explosive exposé broke. A confidential spreadsheet, laying bare Montgomery Innovations' shaky cash flow, leaked to every major business outlet. It showed soaring interest payments, hidden liabilities, and margins so thin they might vanish overnight. Ethan had no clue where the leak came from, but Charlotte did. Richard Langford had quietly secured the documents through a trusted contact inside Ethan's own finance department. Someone fed up with his arrogance and willing to help Charlotte quietly tip the scales. Overnight, the revelation made it nearly impossible for Ethan to downplay the crisis. As if on cue, Madison faced her own public reckoning. Luxury boutiques revoked her open credit lines, citing the cloud of negative press. Socialites who once invited her to every brunch and launch party now ghosted her completely, unwilling to be linked with the woman branded as a homewrecker and an opportunist. That rumor of Madison siphoning money meant for charity was a well-placed twist from Charlotte's network. Now isolated and short on cash, Madison clung desperately to Ethan, demanding he fix everything. But Ethan could barely keep himself together as his fortress buckled under scandal and spiraling debt. From her mother's calm townhouse, Charlotte watched the chaos with unflinching resolve. A small ache lingered for the man she had once adored, but her anger and commitment to justice easily drowned any pity. If Ethan and Madison thought she would crumble, they had miscalculated her entirely. She would see this through, no matter how brutal the endgame became. With the pressure choking him from every angle, Ethan finally snapped. One night, he let himself into the penthouse using a spare key he had secretly kept. He found Charlotte alone in the living room and cornered her, desperation etched into every line of his face. Charlotte wasn't afraid, but she was deeply annoyed. She had hoped to avoid an unplanned showdown like this. "What the hell have you been doing?" Ethan barked, his eyes blazing. "I know you're the one behind these leaks, these rumors. Why are you trying to destroy everything we built?" Charlotte stayed perfectly composed, standing by the tall window overlooking the glittering Palo Alto skyline. She crossed her arms, her pregnancy obvious beneath a loose satin robe. "You destroyed our marriage the second you betrayed me with Madison," she said icily. "I'm simply making sure you face the consequences. You don't get to walk over me and expect no fallout." Ethan's frustration cracked through his calm mask. "You're risking our child's future," he snapped. "If I go down, you go down too." Charlotte's expression turned to stone. "Wrong. My inheritance and assets are protected by my family trust. You, on the other hand, are drowning in debt, reckless spending, and scandal. The baby will be fine, Ethan. I'll make sure of that." Her words cut deeper than any rumor ever could. Ethan felt it in his bones. The empire he had built at breakneck speed was tipping over the edge, and Charlotte held all the power now. A flicker of raw desperation crossed his face. "Then what do you want?" he asked, his voice quieter, ragged at the edges. Charlotte regarded him with a calm that only sharpened the blow. "An apology, for starters. A real one. Not just for me, but for our child. A promise you won't twist the story to make yourself look good. And you will cut Madison out of your life completely, if you want even a shred of a chance at fixing this." Ethan exhaled, fury and regret churning in his chest. Before he could respond, the doorbell rang. One of Charlotte's security staff announced Richard Langford had arrived. When Richard stepped inside, he greeted Ethan with a curt nod, then turned to Charlotte. "I brought the revised documents as requested," he said evenly. Ethan's pulse hammered. Documents. He knew instantly. Divorce papers. His stomach clenched as reality slammed into him. If Charlotte served them now, with his reputation in tatters and his finances teetering, the settlement could ruin him outright. Without a word, Charlotte took the folder from Richard and laid it neatly on the table, right where Ethan couldn't ignore it. "We can talk about this tomorrow, Ethan." Charlotte's voice was calm but final. "For now, I'd like you to leave." He lingered, wanting to protest, wanting to say something that might undo everything, but the words caught in his throat. With a frustrated exhale, he turned and strode to the door. Just before stepping out, he glanced back at her, his eyes dark with regret. "I'm sorry," he murmured, so softly it barely reached her. Then he was gone, leaving Charlotte in the hushed quiet of the penthouse. She closed her eyes, letting the weight of her choice settle over her shoulders. The confrontation had rattled her more than she cared to admit. It was never easy watching the father of her unborn child unravel piece by piece. But she reminded herself of his betrayal, and the vow she'd whispered to herself so many nights ago. Never let them think you are weak. Outside, the city lights glittered indifferently. Inside, a marriage lay in ruins, and the final blow hadn't even landed yet. Madison Price paced anxiously in her overpriced condo, checking her phone every few seconds. She had left dozens of voicemails for Ethan over the last few days, but he hadn't answered a single one. Her credit cards were maxed out, eviction threats piled on her coffee table, and the once glamorous decor of her apartment now felt like a mocking monument to the fake socialite life she could no longer maintain. A sharp knock jolted her out of her frantic spiral. She practically sprinted to the door, praying it might be Ethan. But when she opened it, she found Fiona, one of the last people she wanted to see. Fiona's frosty expression made Madison's stomach drop. "Fiona? What are you doing here?" Madison asked, stepping aside reluctantly. Fiona walked in without hesitation. "I'm here to collect a few things for Charlotte. She told me you still have some old keepsakes of hers from years ago." Madison's confusion flickered into dread. "She couldn't text me herself?" Fiona shrugged, her tone clipped. "I wouldn't know. Maybe she wanted you to get the message. You're no longer welcome in her life." She let that sink in, then added, her stare sharp as glass, "And I wanted to see for myself if the rumors were true. That you're broke, that Ethan cut you off." Madison's cheeks flamed red. "Get out, Fiona. This has nothing to do with you." Fiona folded her arms calmly. "I was Charlotte's friend long before you ever wormed your way into her trust. I'm not leaving until I have what I came for." Cornered, Madison gestured bitterly at a small box shoved into the hall closet. "Fine. Take whatever's Charlotte's, but tell her." Her voice cracked as she tried to salvage her dignity. "Tell her. I never meant for this to happen. I was lonely. It just spiraled out of control." Madison stammered, her eyes shimmering with tears. Fiona let out a cold laugh. "And you thought sleeping with her husband was the answer?" She grabbed the small box from the closet and headed for the door. "You should be ashamed. We all trusted you when you pretended to care about Charlotte." Madison's lip quivered, her voice cracking. "I didn't plan it. I really thought Ethan loved me, but now he's gone too. Please, Fiona, can't you at least tell Charlotte I'm sorry? I have no one left." Fiona paused at the doorway, her eyes like steel. "You made your bed. Now lie in it. Charlotte owes you nothing. You destroyed her marriage and made a fool of yourself. You're lucky she hasn't ruined you completely." Without waiting for a reply, Fiona left, leaving Madison frozen in the middle of her crumbling apartment, trembling and utterly alone. The message was clear. Her last connections to Charlotte's world were gone for good. She sank onto her couch, hugging a cushion to her chest as sobs shook her shoulders. She had thought Ethan would protect her. Now she realized she had been nothing but a liability, cast aside the moment she became too costly. She buried her face against the fabric, muffling a broken wail. Her mind clawed through memories of sleepovers with Charlotte, whispered secrets, shared dreams, before greed turned her heart ugly. If only she could turn back time. If only she'd said no that first night Ethan came to her, whispering temptations she now wished she'd never believed. The emptiness pressed so hard on her ribs it hurt to breathe. Was it worth it? She wondered bitterly, replaying the lies and stolen moments that had shattered so many lives. In the cold silence of that cheap, overpriced condo, Madison finally accepted the truth. Once Charlotte Harris decided you were her enemy, escape was a fantasy. Meanwhile, Ethan's downfall gathered speed. Banks called in massive loans, demanding repayment in full. His flagship smart city project stalled when funding dried up, and buyers began pulling their deposits in droves. Investors in Montgomery Innovations' public branches demanded his resignation to save what was left of their portfolios. Even his father, Lawrence Montgomery, threatened to sever ties entirely if Ethan didn't step aside to salvage the family name. Through it all, Charlotte stayed focused, steadily working with Richard Langford to finalize every detail of her legal plan. She never missed a prenatal checkup, determined to shield her child from the chaos swirling outside her mother's peaceful home. Oddly enough, the storm cleared her mind like fresh air after a long winter. She saw everything for what it was and exactly what needed to come next. Then came the day she served Ethan with the paperwork, a precisely drafted separation agreement outlining strict terms to protect her and the baby. Tucked inside was a carefully worded clause granting her full custody if Ethan failed to prove financial stability and emotional readiness to be a father. Another clause in the separation agreement demanded that Ethan surrender specific business assets if he defaulted on spousal or child support. Now he sat alone in his half-empty corner office, the papers spread across his mahogany desk. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages, shaking his head in disbelief. "You want everything," he murmured under his breath. "My God, Charlotte." She stood across from him, posture straight and dignified, despite the final weeks of her pregnancy. "You wanted this the moment you chose Madison over our family," she said softly but firmly. "I'm leaving you enough to rebuild, just not at my expense or our child's." Resigned, Ethan picked up the pen and signed. Each stroke felt like carving away the last scraps of his pride. The father he'd spent his life trying to impress now threatened to cut him out of Montgomery Innovations entirely. His mistress had become an anchor dragging him down, and the only person who'd ever truly stood by him, Charlotte, was now the one systematically dismantling the empire he'd built on ego and deceit. When the last signature was done, Charlotte turned to leave, a calm, almost serene smile touching her lips. She had her closure at last. It felt triumphant, yet undeniably bittersweet. Days later, Ethan's resignation from Montgomery Innovations was announced in a sterile press release. He retreated to a secluded villa in Napa Valley, rarely seen again among the tech elite. Madison, now broke and blacklisted, tried calling him countless times. He ignored every message, unwilling to face the living proof of his downfall. A month later, Charlotte gave birth to a healthy baby boy, Alexander Harris Montgomery. The press buzzed with photos of her cradling the newborn, flanked by Helen and a few loyal friends. Headlines crowned her as the woman who faced down a cheating billionaire, and won. Ethan sent a bouquet of white lilies with a handwritten note. "For our son, I'm sorry." Charlotte set the flowers aside, quietly amused at the irony. She would never stand between Alexander and his father, but she would make sure her son grew up knowing exactly what loyalty, betrayal, and accountability meant. In the end, Ethan and Madison lost everything that truly mattered: reputation, wealth, and any shred of genuine love. Charlotte emerged from the storm stronger than ever, carving out a future for herself and her child that no scandal could tarnish. Her transformation, from trusting wife to fierce protector, proved one enduring truth. In a world where loyalty is traded for power, never underestimate the resolve of a woman wronged. Even after the final signatures and polite headlines faded, the echoes of Ethan's betrayal rippled through Silicon Valley's high circles. Charlotte's phone pinged with carefully worded messages from so-called friends testing the limits of her forgiveness. She responded with polite courtesy, but deep down, she knew she would never truly forget what it felt like to be betrayed. And she would never let anyone forget what she did in response. Yet Charlotte resolved never to let bitterness define her. She had new priorities now, chief among them, baby Alexander. Late autumn leaves drifted across the penthouse balcony where Charlotte often stood, gently rocking her infant son to sleep. Some nights, she let herself imagine how different life could have been if Ethan had remained faithful. A family unbroken, a child born into love instead of scandal. But those thoughts never lingered long. The past couldn't be undone. Instead, she poured her heart into building a safe, loving world for Alexander, one untouched by his father's mistakes. Despite the pain between them, Charlotte agreed to a limited visitation schedule. Driven by guilt and a flicker of paternal instinct, Ethan made the effort to see his son at least once a month, arriving in a discreet black SUV instead of the flashy cars he used to flaunt. He was no longer the commanding figure who once dominated every boardroom. His designer suits hung looser on a frame hollowed out by disgrace and regret. At first, Charlotte watched each visit like a sentinel, guarded, protective. But gradually she saw glimpses of genuine tenderness in the way Ethan cradled Alexander, rocking him gently, whispering nonsense words that made the baby giggle. Their relationship remained strained, yet there was an unspoken acceptance. Ethan had paid dearly for his betrayal, and Charlotte had fought fiercely for her self-respect. They were no longer husband and wife, just two flawed people linked forever by the tiny boy cooing between them. Any hope for reconciliation stayed buried where it belonged. No apology, however sincere, could ever bridge the distance now carved between them. Meanwhile, rumors drifted through Silicon Valley about Madison. Some said she'd packed up her few remaining belongings in the dead of night to dodge relentless creditors. She retreated to a shabby rental far outside the city, uninvited, unwanted by the social circles she once schemed to conquer. Alone, she wrestled with the hollow echo of a friendship she had betrayed for fleeting thrills and easy luxury. Whispers claimed she had tried to reach Ethan for help, but he never returned her calls. In contrast, Charlotte's world slowly bloomed again. She renewed her charity work, this time focusing on single mothers and women blindsided by betrayal. Her own trials had taught her how quickly life could shatter and how vital it was to have someone fighting in your corner. Under her leadership, the Montgomery Foundation expanded its outreach, transforming a scandal's ashes into real hope. One bright afternoon, Charlotte stood on her balcony with Alexander giggling in her arms. For a moment, the city faded away, leaving only his tiny heartbeat and his bright, innocent eyes that promised a future far removed from lies and heartbreak. Yet beneath her calm smile, a single fragile fear lingered. A fear that one day, Alexander would grow old enough to learn how broken things once were. She prayed silently he would see not the pain but the strength that rose from it. She pressed a soft kiss to his forehead, reminding herself, real love wasn't a fairy tale spun from illusions. It was the quiet strength that survives even the deepest betrayal. It was about resilience, empathy, and standing tall for those who depend on you, no matter what storms rage outside. In that quiet moment on the balcony, Charlotte Harris understood she hadn't just survived her ordeal. She had rewritten her life's story from the ashes. It was never truly about the cheating billionaire or the treacherous best friend. It was about a woman who refused to be broken, who chose to shape a new future for herself and her son. One built on integrity, resolve, and the unshakable belief that sometimes losing everything is the first step toward discovering who you're meant to be. No matter how high we rise or how untouchable we think we are, life has a way of humbling us. Ethan Montgomery learned that lesson the hardest way possible, his betrayal unraveling into ruin, dragging Madison Price down with him. Yet Charlotte emerged from the storm stronger than ever, a living testament that a determined heart can bend fate to its will, even when the odds seem impossible. So my wonderful friends, here we are, at the end of Charlotte's stormy but inspiring journey. If you're still with me right now, I know this story must have touched a soft corner of your heart, just like it did mine while sharing it with you. What can we carry from her scars and triumphs into our own daily lives? Maybe it's this: life will test our faith in people. It will shake our sense of security. And sometimes the ones we trust most can shatter us the deepest. But as the Stoics remind us, what stands in the way becomes the way. Charlotte didn't let betrayal define her. She turned it into fuel to build a better, kinder life for her son and herself. Each of us faces storms that feel unfair or unbearable. Sometimes we think, if only things had been different. But Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Charlotte embodied this truth. She didn't control Ethan's lies or Madison's envy, but she fiercely guarded her spirit and her child's future. So if tonight you're holding on to anger, or heartbreak, or a regret that won't let you sleep, pause, breathe, and ask yourself, how can I shape this pain into something wiser, softer, and more powerful than I was yesterday? You and I, we can't undo what broke us, but we can choose who we become because of it. That, my dear friends, is real power. If Charlotte's story gave you even a sliver of hope or courage, please don't leave it here. Like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and hit that subscribe button. Every click helps us keep telling raw human stories like this, stories that remind us we're not alone in the storms. Thank you for being here with me tonight. Remember, karma rarely forgets, and neither should you. Stay strong, stay kind, and I'll see you in the next story.